Before his own mother could kiss her 18-year-old son goodbye at his funeral, someone had already cut open his throat and removed a piece of it. That is not a horror movie plot. That is the official, documented fact sitting inside the autopsy report of Nolan Wells, a college football player who went to celebrate the 4th of July with friends on a remote island and never came home. His friends came back. He didn't. Police quickly said no foul play. But then his family paid for a second autopsy out of their own pocket in the middle of planning his funeral. And that second autopsy found something the first one couldn't explain, alongside evidence that was already gone forever before the second doctor ever touched his body. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through exactly what they found, why that missing throat tissue actually matters more than you think, and the one single question about his final moments that no one, not the family, not the state, not the independent examiner, has been able to answer. Stay till the end, because the last finding in this report changes the way you look at everything that came before it. Quick note before we start. Everything you are about to hear comes from official statements, the coroner's office, court filings, and verified reporting from outlets like ABC, CNN, NBC, and WLOX. Nothing here is dramatized. Nothing here is invented. A real 18-year-old lost his life, and a real family is still waiting for real answers. If you want serious American crime cases covered carefully, without wild theories thrown at you, this is the channel for that. Subscribe because this case is still developing, and we will be back the moment new results drop. Now, let's start from the beginning. Nolan Xavier Wells, 18 years old. A wide receiver for Southwest Mississippi Community College. If you know anything about small-town college football in the South, you know what that means to a family. Nolan wasn't just playing a sport, he was building a future. Scouts watch these programs. Coaches remember these names. For a kid like Nolan, every summer before a new season was supposed to be about conditioning, film review, and getting ready to prove himself on the field again. Instead, that summer became the last one his family would ever spend with him. On July 4th, Nolan joined a group of friends for what was supposed to be a completely normal, all-American holiday. A boat ride out to Horn Island, a barrier island sitting off the Mississippi coast in the Gulf. If you've never been somewhere like Horn Island, picture this. White sand, open water, absolutely nothing else. No stores, no restrooms, no lifeguards, no shelter if the weather turns. And critically, no cell phone service anywhere on the island. It's the kind of place people go specifically to disconnect, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous when something goes wrong, because there is no fast way to call for help, no way to alert anyone in real time, and no witnesses beyond whoever happens to already be standing there. The group spent the day the way you'd expect a group of teenagers and young adults to spend the 4th of July. Swimming, laughing, celebrating. At some point in the afternoon, as the sun started dipping, the group decided it was time to head back to the mainland. And this is the exact moment where everything quietly went wrong. Nolan didn't get back on that boat with everyone else. According to accounts given afterward, he chose to stay behind a little longer. Maybe he wanted a few more minutes in the water. Maybe he wanted a few more minutes alone. We don't know his exact reasoning, because he never got the chance to explain it to anyone who loved him. His friends made it back to shore safely that evening. Nolan did not. For the next 48 hours, his mother Christine and his stepfather Elmore had absolutely no idea where their son was. Try, just for a second, to actually sit with what those 48 hours must have felt like. You're a mother. Your son went out on a boat with his friends for a holiday. The friends come home. Your son doesn't answer his phone, because there's no signal where he is. Hours pass. Then a full day passes. Then another. Every single one of us knows that specific, sickening feeling of a phone call not being picked up when it matters most. Now imagine that feeling stretched across 2 full days, with a barrier island standing between you and any answer at all. On July 6th, that silence finally broke, in the worst possible way. A United States Park Service ranger patrolling the shoreline of Horn Island found a body face down in the water. It was Nolan. And here is where the family says the first real red flag appeared, not in what was found, but in how quickly officials moved to explain it away. within a remarkably short window after his body was discovered, before toxicology testing had even been ordered, before any real investigation had meaningfully begun. Local officials publicly stated there were no immediate, obvious signs of foul play or trauma. Think about the order of events here. A body is found. Within hours, before labs run a single test, before a coroner even completes a full examination, the public narrative is already being shaped. This was likely just a tragic accident. For a grieving mother who hadn't even had time to process that her son was gone, that framing didn't land as reassurance. It landed as a door being closed before it had ever really been opened. To his credit, Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind didn't stop there. He has publicly stated that despite the absence of obvious visible injury, his office still requested a full, formal autopsy through the state medical examiner's office, specifically to rule out trauma or foul play definitively. That single decision matters because it tells you that even local officials understood this case deserved more than a first glance. But for Christine and Elmore, one autopsy, conducted by the state, with no outside oversight, wasn't going to be enough. And so, in the middle of planning their son's funeral, arguably one of the most painful logistical nightmares any parent can be forced into, they made an extraordinary decision. They commissioned a second, fully independent autopsy. Not because they were certain something sinister had happened, not because they had proof, but because they refused to let their son's story end on an early, convenient conclusion before every possible angle had actually been examined. They brought in Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist and the former chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., a man with decades of experience determining exactly the kinds of things this family desperately needed answered. Standing beside them through this decision was attorney Ben Crump, a name many of you will already recognize from other high-profile cases involving questions of justice and transparency. And what Dr. Mitchell found in that second autopsy is exactly why this story didn't stay a small local headline in Mississippi. It became national news. On July 22nd, in front of national media at the NAACP's convention in Chicago, Ben Crump stood at a podium and revealed the preliminary findings of that independent autopsy. And the very first word out of that report is the word that changed the entire trajectory of this case: undetermined. Cause of death: undetermined. Manner of death: undetermined, pending further investigation. Let's slow down on that word, because it's easy to misunderstand. Undetermined does not mean nothing was found. It does not mean the pathologist has no opinion. It means, specifically, that the evidence physically available to him was not sufficient to state with medical certainty exactly how Nolan died. For a family that had already been told early on that this looked like a straightforward drowning accident, that one word reopened absolutely everything. And then came the detail that has quietly become the center of this entire case. Dr. Mitchell's report revealed that during the original state autopsy, the one conducted before Nolan's body was ever released back to his family, tissue had been removed from his throat for laboratory testing. Now, I want to be completely fair here, because this detail gets sensationalized online in ways that aren't accurate. Multiple doctors, speaking publicly about this case, have confirmed that removing tissue samples for closer laboratory examination is a normal, routine part of a standard state autopsy. This is not, by itself, evidence of a cover-up. Medical examiners do this constantly, in cases with zero suspicion of foul play whatsoever. But here is the part that actually matters. When a second, independent autopsy is requested afterward, whatever tissue was already removed during the first exam simply cannot be re-examined by the second pathologist. It's gone. Sent off for testing, stored elsewhere, or already consumed in the process. That creates a permanent, unfillable gap in the second examination, no matter how skilled or experienced that second doctor is. Combine that missing tissue with something else working against Dr. Mitchell. By the time the second autopsy took place, Nolan's body had already reached a significant level of decomposition, having spent time both in the water and in the Mississippi summer heat before recovery. Because of those two compounding factors, the missing tissue and the decomposition, Dr. Mitchell stated he was unable to properly examine three separate, critical categories of evidence. 1. His lungs, which forensic pathologists rely on heavily to determine whether, and how much water was actually inhaled, a key indicator in any suspected drowning case. 2. His stomach contents, which can offer clues about timeline, substances, and the final hours before death. 3. The presence or absence of bruising anywhere on his body, evidence that, by this point, had likely already faded or become unreadable due to decomposition. 3 major categories of forensic evidence. All 3 unavailable. All 3 gone before the second independent examination had even truly begun. That is not a small technicality. In forensic pathology, those 3 things, lung condition, stomach contents, and bruising, are often the exact pieces of evidence that separate an accidental drowning from something far more troubling. And in Nolan's case, all 3 doors were already closed by the time anyone outside the state had a chance to look. But Dr. Mitchell did find something. Something he chose to document very specifically and very carefully. Dr. Mitchell's report documented red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head. Let's be precise about what he did and did not say, because this is where a lot of online coverage of this case goes completely off the rails with speculation. He did not call it definitive proof of a blunt force injury. He did not call it evidence of an assault. He did not name a suspect, a weapon, or a scenario. What he did say, according to attorney Ben Crump, is that this finding meant the results could not rule out the possibility of foul play. That phrase, "cannot rule out," is deliberate, careful, clinical language from an experienced forensic pathologist. It is not an accusation thrown into the void. It is a professional acknowledgement that, based on the limited evidence still available to him, an alternative explanation for Nolan's death has not been eliminated as a possibility. In plain English, the easy, early explanation of "he probably just drowned in an accident" is no longer something that can be stated with full confidence, medically speaking. The door investigators tried to close within hours of finding his body has been forced back open by an outside expert with decades of experience. And underneath that single red mark sits the one question that both pathologists, state and independent, now agree is the most important unanswered piece of this entire puzzle. How exactly did Nolan enter the water? This sounds simple. It is not. Forensic pathologists will tell you that when a body is recovered from water and drowning is the suspected cause of death, understanding the exact circumstances of entry is absolutely critical to determining what actually happened. Was the person conscious when they entered? Unconscious? Did they walk or swim involuntarily? Or were they placed in the water some other way? This question becomes even more significant in Nolan's case for one specific reason. By all accounts, Nolan was known to be a capable, comfortable swimmer. This wasn't someone unfamiliar with open water, panicking the moment conditions got difficult. That fact alone doesn't prove anything sinister happened. People who can swim well still drown every single year, from currents, exhaustion, medical events, or simple bad luck. But it does mean that "he just drowned" is not automatically the simplest explanation anymore. It's a question that now requires actual answering, not assuming. And right now, as of this week, neither the state's examination nor Dr. Mitchell's independent examination has been able to answer it. Not because nobody is trying, but because so much of the evidence that could have answered it, his lung condition, potential bruising, the tissue already removed from his throat, was compromised or missing before anyone got the full opportunity to look. Which brings us to a bigger question a lot of people are now asking publicly. Why did this small, local Mississippi case become a story the entire country is watching? This case did not go national by accident, and it's important to understand exactly why, without jumping to conclusions the evidence hasn't earned. At that same NAACP convention where the autopsy findings were announced, NAACP President Derek Johnson addressed Nolan's case directly. He described what he called a troubling, recurring pattern, cases involving young black men whose deaths occur while spending time primarily among white peer groups, where the earliest version of events given to the public later turns out to be incomplete, rushed, or simply wrong. Photos from that 4th of July trip do show Nolan surrounded mostly by white friends that day, although at least one other black friend was also present. To be absolutely clear, none of that, by itself, proves anything happened to Nolan beyond a tragic accident. Correlation is not causation, and a photo of a friend group tells you nothing definitive about what occurred hours later on an isolated stretch of shoreline. What it does explain is why so many people beyond Nolan's immediate family are watching this investigation closely, demanding the same rigor, the same thoroughness, and the same presumption of seriousness that any case like this deserves. Ben Crump has been careful, publicly and repeatedly, to draw a specific distinction here, one that's easy to miss if you're only skimming headlines. The family is not asking the public to assume guilt. They are not demanding a predetermined outcome, and they are not accusing any specific person of anything. What they are asking for, in their own words, is a full, transparent, and equally rigorous investigation, one where every witness who is on that island is interviewed with the same seriousness, and where no final conclusion is written down on paper until the evidence itself is actually ready to support it. That's a remarkably restrained request from a family that has every emotional right to demand more. And it's worth remembering as we get into what we still don't know. As of right now, several major gaps in this case remain completely open, and it's important to be honest with you about exactly what they are, instead of pretending we have answers we don't. First, toxicology results. As of this week, they have not been publicly released, not from the state's examination, and not from Dr. Mitchell's independent examination. Until that changes, an entire category of possible explanations, from natural causes to something else entirely, remains unresolved. Second, the full official state autopsy itself has still not been publicly released. Jackson County's coroner confirmed as recently as this week that the state medical examiner's report was still not finished, more than 2 weeks after Nolan's body was recovered from the water. Think about that. The earliest, closest in time examination of his body, conducted before decomposition had fully set in, before any tissue had already been removed for a second look, remains completely unknown to the public. The document that likely holds the clearest picture of what happened to Nolan is sitting somewhere, finished or unfinished, while his family waits. Third, and underneath everything else, sits that single unanswered question about the exact moment Nolan entered the water. Every other finding in this case, the missing throat tissue, the red mark on the back of his head, the word undetermined printed on an official report, all of it ultimately circles back to that one moment nobody has been able to reconstruct yet. Just weeks ago, Nolan Wells was an 18-year-old college football player thinking about conditioning drills, his upcoming season, and a normal 4th of July with friends. Today, his name is known across the entire country. Not because his family wanted a spotlight, not because they wanted attention in the middle of the worst period of their lives, but because they refused to accept an explanation that arrived before the investigation genuinely had. Somewhere in Mississippi, right now, a completed state autopsy report likely already exists. Somewhere, toxicology samples are sitting in a lab, being processed. And somewhere, the actual answer to what happened on that island in Nolan's final hours is sitting, fully known to no one publicly yet, while a mother and a stepfather continue living every single day inside the empty space that missing answer has left behind. This story is not finished. Cause and manner of death remain officially undetermined, and until that changes, neither can this case truly close for the public or for the people who loved him most. The moment the state's autopsy or the toxicology results become public, we will be right back here to break down exactly what they say, carefully, and without ever getting ahead of what the actual evidence shows. If this case has held your attention the way it's held ours tonight, make sure you're subscribed, because there is genuinely more still coming, and we don't want you to miss the moment new evidence drops. Before you go, tell me in the comments, out of everything covered tonight, which single detail stood out to you the most? The missing throat tissue? The red mark on the back of his head? Or that one unanswered question about how he actually entered the water? I read every single comment, and honestly, it's often your comments that shape exactly where we take this story next. Nolan Wells deserves the truth. His family deserves the truth. And we'll be here the moment it finally arrives.